So you are a part of a recovery, face of recovery for abuse in a couple different ways, right?
Um, well, I definitely focus more on how to handle the high conflict after a separation or divorce between parents, and making sure that parents continue to focus on the best interest of their child. So I wouldn't say so much recovery, although that does happen. It's more of strategies on how to deal with the high conflict.
Mm. And which I imagine there's healing involved just by changing choices or making better choices. Um, and is this something that is, do you have, is there a demand for this or?
Yes, so there's unfortunately there's a very high demand because in our society the divorce rate is, really fluctuates right around about 50%. So, and a lot of those marriages have kids. And some of the other dynamics that we experience in society, such as, the lack of problem solving skills that are taught to us, throughout our education, and the lack of emotional regulation skills that are not taught to us throughout life in our education. And so when you have this combination of there's a lot of emotion that's going on because of a separation and divorce, and then trying to make logical decisions in the best interest of the children. And really what happens is in our brain, it's really a spectrum of, if we're more emotional, then we're less logical. So it's helping these parents regulate their emotions and get them more to the logical part of the brain to make their decisions in the best interest of their children, and so that their children do not go on to have those long-term effects from divorce. Because what the research has shown is that it's not necessarily divorce that leads to the long-term effects of children of divorce, but it's more of the conflict or that continues between the parents, the ongoing conflict. So if we can get in and resolve that for these families and teach them how to emotionally regulate, teach them self-accountability as well, instead of continuing to point the finger at the other parents, and how to handle some things that they may not agree with the other parent, and really be able to get back to focusing on their children, then their children are going to be great. And even if just one parent in that dynamic chooses to be accountable, chooses to emotionally self-regulate, and chooses to make the decisions in the best interest, research shows that a child only needs one positive role model in their life. So the child's going to be okay. Now, if both parents did it, got on board, even better. But that's what I tell my clients of very first thing. Rule number one, you're only accountable for what you do. You can only control what you do. And you are a huge factor in this. So let's make sure you're making the right choices. So that's a very foundation of my program when I work with the co-parent coaching, as well as when I work with the other program I have is rescuing the parent-child bond, which is more for the parental alienation of the parent, understanding strategies how to reconnect with their alienated child.
But that's wonderful. I love hearing all the different dynamics that this has and takes. And it sounds like you're inundated with it and what it takes to have an impact with the issues of what divorce brings for children and people in between people. Um, And then the parental alienation, like you were saying, is another aspect of what you work with. And that would be a more extreme aspect of what you deal with.
Yes. So those are, I've kind of found myself, I started off as a mental health therapist for children and adolescents, and I found that it's really more about parenting to make sure that our children are developing mentally and emotionally healthy as well as behaviorally healthy. So I switched over to parent coaching to focus on the strategies. And then I noticed that divorce, a lot of times during divorce, children were being overlooked because parents were so emotional about what they were going through, not knowing how to help their child is also going through the grieving process. So I focused more in there. And then I found myself working more with the high conflict. I started doing parent coordination here in Ohio. And I really enjoy, even though it's very challenging, I enjoy getting in there and helping dissolve these conflicts. But then you can't work with these high conflict families and not also know about parental alienation, because the high conflict families are there. That's where you're going to find the parental alienation. Not every high conflict family will have it, but there's a good percentage of at least one parent engaging in a few of the parental alienation tactics, if not both parents. And that's a lot of what I'm finding is sometimes both parents are engaging it and blaming the other parent for parental alienation. So that goes right back to my rule number one of being self-accountable to make sure that you're aware and you're not engaging in those things that are going to be harmful for your child.
Wow, that's powerful, the dynamics of a high conflict family. And what you're saying is it's a higher probability with those relationships to have the parental alienation. And you feel like there's more cases where both parents are doing it or one?
I would say, if we don't have a whole lot of research, but from what I've come across, more so both parents. And with the parents that I have in some of the ones that I have in my program, there's a good percentage of them who have acknowledged that, for some point in time, they were also doing those same alienation tactics, but now they find themselves as the alienated parent. And so, one of those cases that I've worked on, and I think this is a good point to make for your listeners who deal with, the narcissistic abuse and, if there's borderline or any other personality disorder that causes the high conflict personality, is that number one tactic of parental alienation that a parent uses is bad mouthing. And it's so, if you think about it, I think, there probably is times that I have maybe said something that's not great that my kids have overheard about the other parent. And so I know how easy it is to slip into that. And that even goes to the point of sometimes you don't even have to say anything. If you don't have a positive behavioral and emotional response to a positive comment the other child's making about the parent, then that is also that meets that same standard of you're not being supportive of the relationship, and they start to shut down and not talk about the other parent. And so then that meets a different criteria of the parental alienation, of where the child's not allowed to talk about the other parent when in the parent's home. And again, that may not be said, but kids are very emotionally sensitive to emotional contagion. So they can pick up on, oh, okay, my parent doesn't like when I talk about the other parent, so I can't talk about this part of my life with the other parent. So going back to what I was saying is that, that very first one, bad mouthing or not being emotionally supportive of the relationship, some children, especially the higher functioning children, the ones who are, have more of a positive self-esteem and they're more self-aware, they pick up that their parent is engaging in this bad mouthing about the other parent, and they just don't want to be a part of it. So sometimes the alienator actually becomes alienated, and they just find that toxicity and they choose to not spend time with the other parent. Nice. So and I think that's what's really difficult for the courts, is because it's not just, this is so not black and white. There's so many layers, and peeling off these layers, and how did each participant, the alienated parent, the alienator, the target parent, the child, how did they all contribute to this? Another important dynamic to go off of that point is a lot of times, and again, I don't have a great percentage of this, but I will warn parents in high conflict family, be careful around the ages of 11 and 12, because that's a lot of when more of the alienation does set in. And what happens is we're now considering the developmental stage of the child to where they start to go through individuation. That's a very natural process for them to go to, because by the time
when they go through what?
It's called individuation. So they're becoming, that means they're becoming a separate part of their parents. And it's a very important part or stage for them to go through, because we don't want a 20-year-old, a 25-year-old still relying on mom and dad and not being able to.
At home eating Cheetos, right?
So it's very normal. But with that aspect, as they need less of the parents, and then you have these other dynamics going on of a parent bad mouthing the other parent, then that just exacerbates that. So, you know, it becomes extreme, and it's not a functional developmental result of that. So those you have to be careful. And when I've read the research, and this is one of the kickbacks or problems of accepting parental alienation, is Dr. Gardner had titled it as a syndrome, parental alienation syndrome. Well, syndrome is something that just occurs within one person. But the research has found this is not it. The child just doesn't develop this on his or her own. The child develops this from the alienator, and is usually, and this is kind of goes to how all parties interact in this. The target parent, unfortunately, has a normal human response to where if they start to get the disrespectful behavior that the child says, does or says, then they start to respond with getting mad at the child, and or, you know, sometimes even yelling at the child, punishing the child. And then that just, unfortunately, that's called secondary estrangement to that, where that reinforces the alienation.
Wow. There's so much different layers to this that it's amazing. It feels like a science or something almost. And
we're trying to figure it out for sure, but there's a lot of research that has to go into that. And it is a science, but we just haven't figured out all the components yet.
Do you think that this has been, why do you think it hasn't been researched or brought into the open very much?
Well, that's a really good question. So the first part of why I would say it's not researched is think about our society and divorce. Like, divorce wasn't really accepted until like after the sexual revolution, right? So that happened in the 1960s.
Which is 40 years ago, maybe 50?
About 60 years ago. So, but we do know alienation actually occurred before then. Albert Einstein was actually an alienated parent. And, you know, there's documentation and letters that he wrote, and he used the word alienated, that he's been alienated from his sons. Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic and story. So this has been going on. There's even cases that have been noted in courts in England, all the way back to 1800. So it has been documented. It has occurred, you know, it has always occurred. But since the level of divorce was not higher before, we don't see as much. And I do want to put a disclaimer on there. Alienation, although it is more likely to happen in divorced families, does happen in families that are still intact as well. Families that are dysfunctional, and it is going to have that, you know, that abusive relationship, a lot of what you work with, where the alienator is a narcissist or a borderline personality disorder. Can be antisocial, but we kind of see less of those. Or a paranoid personality disorder is the other one, I think. Did I cover them all? So anyways, it can happen in an intact family, and it has happened. There is Dr. Amy Baker in her book, The Ties That Bind, I think it's called, has case studies of adult who, as children, they were alienated as the parent, even though their parents were in the same household. So the alienator still used the child as a pawn against the other parents. So it can happen. I think that's important for your listeners to be aware that it can happen in intact families. But getting back to your question of, so we didn't have the amount of these cases that were happening. Another dynamic that we have to consider that isn't talked about as much, but Bill Eddy, who he's the founder of the High Conflict Institute, and I've done a lot of studying under him, taken his courses.
Wow, I love him. I'm
I
actually
love Bill. Oh, he's so
yes.
he's so much fun. I love the course. We did Zoom course back in February, and he's just like the sweetest guy. He was like it was all women and him. He's just like a grandpa figure, but he's so intelligent. So you know a lot about him. He's written a lot of books, but what has helped him, or he has the, I think he had the LSW first. So he's a licensed social worker back to get his law degree. So he gets both aspects. He gets it from the legal aspect, and then he gets it from the psychological disorder background of what's going on. So extremely intelligent.
He also, I think he worked with judges.
Oh yeah.
Over the judges, I believe. So he wasn't just an attorney. Yeah.
Oh, he provides trainings for judges. And
yes. Yeah.
So he, in one of his books that I read, I can't remember which one. I think it was called Don't Alienate the Children. I think it was that one. And he made note that even though we see like the narcissist and borderline personality is about 6 to 7% of the whole population, that we're going to continue to see that go higher because of a lot of our society, really is about, the me generation and not really knowing kind of like the immediate gratification plays into that. And like, again, not knowing how to emotionally regulate. So we're going to have more cases. I think and don't quote me on this, I think he estimates it's going to be more like 10% in a couple years. So we're going to see these cases continue to rise. And if you think about 10%, that's 1 out of every 10 people. So people who are dating out there, be aware. Like
yes.
1 out of 10 people has the personality disorder that can ruin your life. Definitely be aware of them. I shouldn't say ruin your life, but definitely take over your life for a bit. You definitely have to invest in your treatment and recovery from that. Is that a fair statement to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because you can absolutely recover from it, but we just have to acknowledge it is one of the worst things someone will experience to be in an abusive relationship like that. Not only one-on-one, but then when they use the children as pawns against you. So it's a psychological nightmare.
It is.
Yeah. So that is why, it's more recent. We haven't had as many divorces earlier than that. And it does take us a little bit to recognize it. Now, I will say on the other, kind of another thing that fills into this is Dr. Gardner. A lot of people are not big, let's just say they're not big fans, probably at the other spectrum. They've accused him of being a pedophile. And again, he is the one who came up with the parental alienation syndrome, which is not a syndrome, but parental alienation does exist. We just need to figure out what else to call it. But he was accused of being a pedophile. One of his, I did read one of his books. He wrote like 80 books. One of his books, there was a child who was accusing the father of sexual abuse. He walked the reader through the whole process and pointed out how the child was not telling the truth. I can't quote what exactly happened, but it did line up. It did line up to even the mother acknowledged that the child had created this. And so both parents were like, yes, this didn't, the dad, of course, was like, I never did this. The mom acknowledged what Dr. Gardner was saying, that the child had made this up in their mind. And the child actually did come back and say he was making them up. I don't know if it was that case particularly, but then attorneys got to spin this to make it look good for their clients. So if their clients being accused of parental alienation, then a lot of attorneys are now arguing, well, that doesn't even exist because Dr. Gardner was, they accused him of being a pedophile or defending pedophiles, and that, the research goes against what he said, and it's not a syndrome. So it's just, and I'll tell you this, I overlap in the courts. I go testify for the courts, and I have got reprimanded by an older psychologist, and I've got reprimanded by an attorney who is also a guardian ad litem, that I am never to say parental alienation because they look at that as such a bad word. And I find it so strange. I find the younger generation of attorneys are definitely more receptive of it. So I think the older generation was probably right in the midst of like all the fire that, of accusations towards Dr. Gardner. So that dynamic plays into it of why, there's a force that's against even looking into it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's problematic because in courts, both parents can accuse each other of parental alienation. So it's definitely a mess for the courts to try to figure out.
Yes, it sounds like it. And I have so many questions. So like you were touching on with the court system, you said you were reprimanded by a few people, and to never say PA. Is this something that you see with other people's cases? Because I know you work with people when parental alienation is happening. Are they having to not address it, or?
What I suggest to all my clients is I suggest don't say it. Mm-hmm. And here's how to look at it. And don't go in and label your ex as a narcissist or borderline personality disorder, because the court really frowns upon a lay person making a diagnosis. That's actually against the law. You cannot make a diagnosis of a person if you're not a licensed psychologist or a therapist or counselor. And even if you are a licensed therapist, counselor, psychologist, there has to be a clinical interview that's done in order to make that diagnosis. So even if your own licensed therapist says, it really sounds like he has narcissistic personality disorder, she technically, I know that happens a lot. And I think it is helpful to at least understand, like, okay, this sounds right. This sounds like what's going on. But she can't go in, he or she cannot go into court and say, her ex has this, because there was no evaluation done. Mm-hmm. So you want to stay away from labels. What you want to focus on is, what are the behaviors? So my child, actually, I'll tell you that my child did come home and tells me that, my ex talks bad about me. And it's been years. I mean, we're probably 15 years at least. And, even till the other day, and my son, who's 17 years old, he knows what I do, and I talk a lot about what I do. And he told me the other day, my dad's trying to alienate you again. Here's what he said. He brought up what happened in court. And again, court was like 15 years ago. So, I think a human response of a parent is to get, defensive and want to respond exactly to that. But the important part with your kids, and I know I'm going on a side note here, is just to focus on them. Well, how'd that make you feel when he said that? Don't make it about you. Just make it about your child and what your child's going through. So I know that's a side note. Getting back to what you bring to court.
Good side note. Thank you.
Huh?
Good side note.
So getting back to court, you just want to describe the behaviors of, my child wants to have pictures of me over there and says they always get ripped up. And you have to be careful about says. You have to like term it a different way because it's hearsay. So you have to say, my child wants pictures and is not allowed to have pictures of me over there. When I call for phone calls on a like regular basis, they are not returned. Here and there, you don't want to nitpick. But if it's like, he had vacation with my child for 10 days and I didn't hear from, I tried calling every day, never got a phone call back. This happens regularly when, he's not on vacation on days that, but this is problematic. You can say my child has started calling me by my first name. And that's one of the criteria. So you would really want to go down those 17 parental alienation tactics. And then there's 8 behavioral manifestations. So a parent can engage in the parental alienation tactics without alienation setting in and the child having manifestations of it. So you talk about what the other parent did to cause the alienation, and then the child manifestation behaviors such as not giving, one's like giving frivolous reasons or rationalizations for not wanting to visit. One time I had a girl say, I don't want to spend time with my mom because she doesn't give me the plans 4 to 5 days ahead of time. So that's not typical. Now, if a child says, I don't want to see my parent because I feel like all she does is yell at me and I don't feel heard or understood, well, that's a little bit more reasonable there. And we may not be looking at parental alienation. We may be looking at estrangement instead.
Right. Estrangement.
Yeah. So estrangement, let me clarify that, because I think that's another thing that causes a lot of kickback for parental alienation, is that there are cases of estrangement. There are cases in which a child does not want to see the other parent for sufficient reasons, such as the parent is verbally abusive of the child, the parent is physically abusive of the child, neglectful, or sexually abusive. So there's a sufficient reason on why the child does not want to have a relationship with the parent. So that would be estrangement. Going back to the child behavioral manifestations, if the child starts to reject other family members as well of the targeted parent, that's when it's really deep, because the parent has successfully alienated the target parent, and now they're working on anybody who can contradict what the alienating parent is saying. So any friends or families that may vouch for the target parent, the alienator wants to work those people out of the child's life as well. So that's a major symptom that usually happens more once towards the end. Or I shouldn't say the end, but there's a lot of other things that happen first. I'm trying to think, it's not devaluation, I can't remember what the first one's called, but it's really a campaign of denigration. That's what it's called. A campaign of denigration, to where the child sets out to say bad things about the other parent and convince other bad things about the target parent and convince other people that the target parent is a bad person. So they start campaigning with the alienating parent. Then we have, I'm just trying to pull some of these off the top of my head. Anyways, so you would want to look those up. The 17 alienating parent behaviors, the 8 child manifestation, and then you just go give examples of each one to the court, but you don't use parental alienation.
Gotcha. So thank you for shedding a little light on that. So the parental alienation, once it starts, do you know, like, typically when it starts, and do you know like how often it's intercepted? I guess there's so many, is it intercepted effectively through court or other, you know what I mean?
So here's something, and I appreciate the court. I know people say a lot of bad things about the court, and I know it depends upon the type of, the judge you get, but I know that I know a lot of good people that are there really to help the families. But there is a limits of what court can do. Court cannot repair the relationship with your child. Court can court can make rulings to say your child has to come see you. But even in that, I don't know. It's hard to enforce. I have seen cases in which, yeah, the child's supposed to come over and see the parent. The court says that over and over. The parent, the child just doesn't come over for one reason or another. If the child refuses to, if the other parent, the alienating parent, refuses to make the child go. And here's one thing to consider is that a lot of times the alienating parent says, well, I can't make them go. Well, as a parent, you have control over your child. I mean, even into adolescence, you can take privileges away and say, this is a part of your responsibility. You have to spend some time with your parent. You have to work through, if it's a case of estrangement, you have to work through. Maybe it's not one-on-one, maybe it's a counselor. Like, okay, if you're not willing to see your parent one-on-one, then we need to, work with a counselor or a coach to help you guys work through whatever problem you're facing.
Mm-hmm.
And until then, like, you don't get to drive the car, or, you don't get to go to a friend's house.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you decide when this happens, this has to be a priority. So parents make their kids go to school. They make their kids go to doctor's appointment. Parents do have that control, but that's a common thing we hear from alienating parents is I can't make them. Yes, you can't make them. So, but the courts, I do have one client right now, which I am very impressed, is the court has made a ruling that for every night the alienating parent does not make the child go to the target parent's house, the alienating parent is charged $500 per night. So there is some kind of motivating factor there in order to get the alienating parent on board and to participate. So I will say there are courts who are really receptive of this and really trying to make a difference in this. And we have to be patient. We just have to, it's a slow process, but keep moving forward on that. But like I said, I see a lot of people, especially I think we're probably in some of the groups together on Facebook, in which, oh my gosh, my heart breaks for these people. I've seen people spend $10,000 from an attorney and say they've gotten absolutely nothing out of it. And it's like, well, they're spending all this money on court. That's not going to fix your relationship with your child. Mm-hmm. What I do, I help parents fix their relationship with their child. And when I started off on, reading this and getting into this, I was only taking on mild to moderate cases because, any kind of, I needed the parent to have, pretty consistent contact with the child. And some of families that I work with, parents I work with, they check in with me every once in a while when the parental alienation starts up again and the child starts to do disrespectful things. And I walk them through the process to lower those walls of the child and reconnect. And so it's more of like a proactive intervention or prevention than having it turn into an intervention later. But I've had so many people reach out to me who are more of the severe cases to where they have very minimal contact with their child. And I've been questioning on whether I would take them on or not, but I have taken them on, and because they really wanted to work with me, and we have strategized in the community. I help them draft the text messages that they can send to their child and how to get through to the child to start breaking down the walls. And so they're willing to have a relationship with the target parent. And I really love, those are the moments I love of my job. Last night, I got a text message or a messenger from a severely alienated parent. And I had just had a session with her earlier that day. I just said, I know this is slow, and I know you want to be down here at point F of like, you're talking all the time, and you want to have a normal relationship with your teenage daughter. However, she's all the way back here at A. So we need to meet her where she is, and you need to be to help her, guide her along. And this is what we do. You can't jump up here. You can't be texting her every single day. And I had another parent ask me, should I send my daughter flowers? No, like, slow down. That's too overwhelming. Think about it as and I know this might seem weird, but think about it. If you were to go on a date with someone and you just met them and you don't don't have that connection yet, but yet you're sending flowers and you're texting every day. And it's like, that's overwhelming and you're going to back up from the relationship, right? Well, same dynamics, same kind of relationship dynamics is if you don't have that good connection and the other person's overwhelming you of trying to connect with you, that puts the walls up and you're not going to get where you need to be with it. So the message that I was coaching her through it and saying, I know this is tough, but you're doing a good job. We just have to stick the course. I know you want to jump ahead. And I gave her some analogies and she's like, I get it. It was 4 hours later, she messaged me and said her daughter reached out to her and asked her to go to lunch with her for today. It was tomorrow, but it would be today. And she's so ecstatic. So like, while doctor, and I know Dr. Warstock in maybe cases in which parents have no contact at all, those programs cost like between $20,000 to $40,000 to go to those family camps for 4 to 7 days and help with the relationship. I am determined to help parents, for the least amount of money. And again, I'm making progress in these severe interactions, and not for the programs for Dr. Warstock and Linda Gottlieb. You have to get a court order. So going through that whole process to get a court order. So I'm really trying to give parents a different avenue of, if you want to reconnect with your child, here's the strategies to do it. If you want to take it to court, you can take it to court, but you're still going to have to do these strategies. You're still going to have to invest in educating yourself on how to connect with your child and repair that relationship.
Absolutely. So would you say that your system which helps re-engage them with their child, does that help them with their court cases? Have you seen where they don't have to go to court maybe as much because of it? Or
So I have a couple cases where the parents just given up on court because they have gone through the court process and that didn't, like, they do have the order and it doesn't work. So then they've come to me and they're getting that, at least a dinner a week with their child and, then progressing and developing kind of like a new normal. And some ways that I put this with parents is, especially as they're like 15, 16, 17, as they're really starting to break away from the parents and, it's more about socializing and they have activities and they have a job, they have schooling, is developing, what does that new normal look like? It's not going to look like what it was before this happened, because your child was younger, they needed you more. But what does that new relationship look like? And what can you be comfortable with? So, I have one whose daughter is 18 years old. And so that is making sure, they schedule dinner a couple times a month because she's off at college. So, it's the same town, and he's comfortable because they keep that connection going. And that's the new normal. So that's another dynamic you have to consider is with the older ones, they're also transitioning into adulthood. So you have to define what that looks like for the relationship, but it's a very healthy relationship. They're going to continue to rely on that parent throughout adulthood to say, I had a really hard day at work. I need somebody to just, talk to. And that's, well, parents are going through this when they're, the kids are younger and they feel like they've lost them. It's like, this is only a small bit of time. And I don't want to minimize that at all, because for parents who don't, that must be awful, right, not to be able to be a part of your child's, take prom pictures, a couple months ago, it's graduation, seeing how many parents weren't invited or weren't allowed at the graduation. That has to be so tough. But if you can stay positive and stay focused on slowly building back that relationship, you have years ahead of you. You have grandchildren that you're going to want to be a part of their life, so, not giving up and, being able to take a step back from all the emotion and psychological trauma that's gone on and develop that map and then that's what I do with clients to help them get there.
That's amazing. I love it. So I'm wondering, I wanted to talk more about what you do, your business. How long have you been doing it? I know that you kind of like graduated into doing this from your experiences with school, right?
Yeah.
And
So I've been working in the field with like families for 20 years now.
mhm.
I started my own private practice business in 2008, and that was just as the parent coach. So I've had my business for 13 years now. And then I started specifically working with divorced families in 2011. So 10 years for specifics of
and and you want so you got into this because I can see that this is something that you're very committed to and looks like brings satisfaction in your life. And I'm just curious what brought you into it? Why did you want to go down this route? Was there something that happened that caused you to want to fight for this cause?
so I I went to grad school for my master's in forensic psychology, and I always liked working with kids and adolescents. And I also so I graduated with my master's in 2005. In 2010, I went back for my children and adolescents graduate certificate, so specializing in that area. So I always liked, working with families, and I like the court scene. A lot of, when I was practicing as a therapist, therapists would hate getting pulled into court. I loved it because I felt it was, more of an exciting, and just being able to relay information to the court. I really like that. So it was just kind of that each turn took me someplace else in life. Like I said, started off as a parent coach helping with behavior problems, but noticing there was a population that was kind of being ignored. Of the divorced families really needed a lot of help with understanding what their children were going through. And then I figured out that co-parent coach, like people needed a co-parent coach to help them work out conflicts. And I've came up with an amazing program using some of Bill Eddy's techniques that I've learned to help them have a step-by-step process. So it's just kind of like how life takes you. It's like, one thing leads to another.
Right.
And there's not many people who want to work with high conflict families. Sometimes this morning was one of those mornings where I'm doing reunification coaching. So this is court ordered.
Mhm.
And a mom's not happy with me because I'm listening to her. I'm not agreeing with her. And it's being able to take that. And not a lot of people can take that conflict because, with working with high conflict families, a lot of times there's someone that turns it on you because you're not doing exactly what they want. But you can't do exactly what they want because that wasn't working for them before. We got to do what's going to work. And I have my program and I stick within my boundaries because that's what works. And that's what I had to tell her. And we had to come to a respectful agree to disagree.
Mhm. That's wonderful. What are some of the things that you do for families? Do you have like a basic routine that you start out with, or and then you acclimate to what they need, or?
Yes. Okay. So starting with my co-parent coaching program, I meet with the parents separately. And a
Mhm.
lot of times this is court ordered, court referred. I get a lot of cases out this way. And I meet with them individually 2 to 3 times. And I focus on developing a coaching plan with them and the procedure to follow to resolve issues during when you're trying to come to a decision with your co-parent. So for instance, I use Bill Eddy's BIF. He wrote a book on keeping it brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And
Mhm.
so I give them an infographic so that they can, as they're writing their email, or as they can keep it and make sure that they're checking off and making sure they're staying within those guidelines. So I meet with them individually, teach them the skills, how to emotionally regulate, how to problem solve, how to communicate. And then we meet together and they bring, each of them brings some problems that they have and they go through the problem solving idea checklist and they have it prepared. And then I'm there as a coach to guide them to resolve it through the skills that they've learned. So if somebody starts to, use inappropriate language, say, out of bounds here, or, say I'm throwing a flag here, I related some way to sports to kind of make it a little bit less threatening, a little more casual, but, and say, which one do you feel like you violated, and have them think through, like, which rule did they break right there, so that they can practice having the good habits.
Awesome. That makes sense. And okay, so you said that you meet with both parents. Is that typical? Do you usually work with both parents, or is it
in the co-parent coaching? Yes, because the co-parent coaching is they're both supposed to be, and again, that's usually court ordered, or I have referrals from attorneys, so they're trying to settle it outside of court, and I have very high success rate, and it's very interesting because it's like sometimes the other parent's like, oh, that's all you wanted? Here, I thought you wanted to take my kids from me. And she's like, no, I just wanted to change the schedule because we're doing so much traveling and transportation. And so it gives them, I had another example of this. I have a couple that was referred to me, and they'd been arguing, their divorce had been over for 7 years, and they had been arguing in court since then, like constant filings in court. And so the court referred them to me, and the dad said, this is what we needed in the beginning. We needed some place that we can just sit down and talk and see each other's perspective, and then be able to make a decision from there. So it's like, those are the comments that are really good to hear, of like how much I help people and give them an alternative besides fighting it out in court. And they really, it's amazing to see. Yeah, when you hear both sides of the story, it's like, oh, okay, I see where the other person's coming from. No, I didn't mean to do that, kind of thing. That's not what I meant or intended by that. So that's really cool to see. So that's the co-parent coaching program. The Rescue the Parent-Child Bond is the, I really would just work with targeted parents, although I got a referral from a GL for an alienating parent. So I'm having to, or an alienator. So I'm having to adapt my program to make sure I'm targeting some of those behaviors, which is, I'll be honest, I don't have a great hold on that, but I'm working on it. But the target parent, and this is what's good, because with my program, the alienator they're not going to want to be involved unless they're court ordered to be involved, right? So I work on, the self-awareness, to understand, the emotional response and how kids have an emotional contagion. So if you're having like a very tense emotional response, your kids are going to pick up on that, and then they're going to associate you with that aversion. So we want to make sure that you are aware of that. And then the next step is emotional regulation, so that you have positive vibes and you're stable, and so that they're going to be more attracted to that. We also go over how to communicate and put some boundaries up with the alienator. We also talk about how you can connect with your child. What are different ways, how, speaking your child's love language, and what really enforces the bond between the parent and the child. And so working on those. Then also talking about the authoritative parenting style, because a lot of times the authority is taken away by the alienator. They change it so that the child feels that they do not have to listen to the other parent. So I talk about how to approach parenting from an authoritative standpoint, but it's even more, and when I say authoritative, that's the most successful, when raising kids, most successful parenting style, that's providing a lot of warmth and love, but also providing boundaries and consequences when needed. That's very important to develop healthy children. But you can't, as a parent, you have to be careful about, a target parent has to be careful about giving consequences and how they approach things. So I work with how to adapt that authoritative parenting style where they're still holding their child accountable, but in a way that the child believes that they're buying into it as well. So they don't feel like, I'm going to say no and I don't have to listen to you, so it's coming at it in a different direction, very strategic. And then just, I also, my last session is how the plan to keep keep the bond going, and red flags to look out for if you're starting to lose your child again through alienation. So that's my Rescue the Parent-Child Bond program.
Wonderful. Excellent. So many aspects. So you said that it was for your co-parenting program. You're working with court-ordered individuals?
Sometimes they're court ordered, sometimes they're referred by their attorneys. Sometimes I've in the past, I have had parents who their co-parent was not willing to participate, but they needed help because they were pulled into that conflict. So I do, if the co-parent's not willing to participate, I still take clients on, because I will teach the parent who's interested in how to put up those healthy boundaries, how they can hold themselves accountable to making sure they're not adding to the conflict or getting pulled into the conflict.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's because I'm just curious, are you assigned as a parent coordinator for the court?
Yeah, so I do have, I do for Hamilton County, I am a parent coordinator. I do not have any cases but I'm on the list of parent coordination. I've had several cases in the past, but I'm not doing any right now. And that does have to be court ordered, and that's more local. You do have to be part of Hamilton County. Your case has to be in Hamilton County here for the court to refer them to me.
Now, is that
and that's a little bit different, because with the parent coordination, the parent coordinator has more authority, to where if the parents do not come to a decision on their own, then the parent coordinator gets to write a decision just like a judge would and file it with the court, and then that's the ruling. But there are some limitations on what they can, that's more for the smaller issues that come up that can't be taken, or like such as whether or not the child can play soccer, or, what to do about vacation schedules, because one person's interpreting the shared parenting plan this way and the other's, interpreting them. So for smaller things, but so that's nice. And I think the court, we just started in the court, I think back in 2016 locally with parent coordination. And the court, I think, is slowly starting to, assign more cases. So I've had several in the past, but none currently.
Do you think it's a positive then? It sounds like, to have that.
Yeah, well, too candid. So that's hard. I was told, so people who have like the mental health background, I think approach parent coordination a lot different than people with the legal degrees, because there's attorneys that are parent coordinators as well. And from some of them just like meet once and try to solve the problem, and then just, I don't know, don't do anything. But as a parent coordinator myself, like anytime a parent involves me in something and they say, well, this is a problem, I'm like, let's solve it, and I'll stick to it and keep solving it. I will say the problem with that is sometimes, again, the one causing the problems don't want a resolution. So, but this provides a resolution, because the parent coordinator can provide that information, or can write a decision based on the information. And if it goes back to court, nothing is confidential in the parent coordinating process. So the court asks what's going on to the parent coordinator. And then here the parent coordinator is an objective person who gets to see everything that's happening on ground zero, where judges only get to see a couple hours according to what's presented to them on the case, which I think would be very difficult for them. In fact, I've made comments to judges and magistrates about that before, of like, I don't know how you do what you do, because like I get to see